Hello, welcome to our third lesson in our video series on Theme D, Religion, Peace and Conflict. Today's lesson is all about terrorism. Today our objectives is to understand what's meant by terrorism. We're going to be thinking about why people carry out terrorist acts, and we're going to think about whether or not a religious person would ever commit a terrorist act. What you need to know today, you need to know that acts of terrorism are illegal and condemned by all faiths, and that anyone who commits a terrorist act does so against the teaching of their religion and not because of it. So what is terrorism? Terrorism, it's kind of linked to what we looked at in our last lesson on violent protest. Terrorism is when people use violence or the threat of violence to create fear to try and achieve a goal that they are trying to achieve. So often it's a political goal they're trying to reach, and the way they get to that is by using violence or the threat of violence to try and create maximum fear. Often the targets of the violence or the targets of the threats of violence are civilians, and they do that. They try to be indiscriminate as much as possible so they can create maximum fear, and that's what terrorists do, and that's what terrorism is. I'm sure you'll be aware of loads of terrorist acts that we've seen in the news over the past decade. And so when I was in year 10, I came home from school to find out the news that the Twin Towers had been attacked by terrorists in New York City, and I'm sure you're familiar with that. It wasn't too long after that we had what was called the 7/7 bombings in London, where a series of bombs went off across London. More recently, there was the Manchester Arena bombing at the Ariana Grande concert, where a bomb was detonated there. All of these were examples of terrorist attacks. Terrorism has got lots of effects. Obviously, death, murder is one. If a bomb goes off and kills lots of people, people die. People might be injured, people might be disabled for life. So one effect is a health effect, it's a harmful effect, it could be death. Connected to that is sadness and huge amounts of people mourning potentially and harmed and sad by the fallout that's occurred from the terrorist activity, and also it can create a climate of fear. So people can be living fearfully because they don't know when the next terrorist attack might occur. It might be that they're fearful of going to cities or to concerts, etc., because they're fearful that they might be themselves the victim of a terrorist attack, or they might be worried that one of their loved ones is. So why do people commit terrorist attacks? Why do people, I mean, from the outset, you can see that terrorism is a horrible thing. So why do people do it? And some of the reasons behind terrorism are things like this. People might be fighting, or they feel they're fighting against social and political injustice. And we've spoken about injustice already in other lessons, but that's how I did it, that fairness is off the scale. That life is unfair for them or for people that they love, and they want to react to that. And they feel that terrorism is their right response for them. It might be they're fighting against poverty. It might be that they live in what they would call a socially unjust community or society where there's lots of rich people and there's a big gap between them and the poor people. It might be because of that. It might be because they're trying to assert their religious beliefs. I'm sure you're familiar with the group ISIS or ISIL, who are trying to bring together what they would call an Islamic state, and they're using terrorism to try and force that. Even though Islam is a peaceful religion, and people who follow Islam would say that the Islamic State isn't an Islamic idea, and it's not being brought around by Islamic means. But that's the Islamic State, and that's another reason someone might have to commit a terrorist attack. And so in our last lesson, we looked at this spectrum when we thought about violence, and we went from people on one end of the spectrum who'd say that all violence was evil, and it's completely wrong and never acceptable, through to people who'd say that sometimes violence can be a necessary evil, through to people who would say that violence is a tool that needs to be used sometimes. They're neutral about violence in an ethical way. So when it comes to terrorism, most religious people would find themselves at this end of the spectrum, and they would say that terrorism is never acceptable. It's not loving, it doesn't show respect to their fellow human, it's unfair, it's cruel, it's an evil thing to do. But occasionally you get a religious person who feels that they've tried everything else, it's their last resort, they've tried voting for something, it hasn't come through, and for them personally they would justify their terrorism that way. Although every single religious group would say no to terrorism. All of them, there's no religious group that condones terrorism. All of them would say that it was completely wrong. When we think about some of our key concepts for this unit, and we think about peace being such an important ideal for all religious people, that terrorism does not bring about peace. It brings about a climate of fear and conflict and difficulty. And so it goes completely against that. When we come to think about justice, it might be that someone feels they've been the victim of injustice and want to respond that way, but you would argue that it's never just to do a terrorist attack, because, as we said before, generally the targets of terrorism are civilians, and that is an unjust thing to do. And finally, reconciliation. If the end goal is to be reconciled and to bring relationships closer together, terrorism, all that's going to do is it's going to make reconciliation more difficult. It's not going to move towards the goal of reconciliation in any way. It's going to be heading in the other direction. And so, for all these reasons, the vast majority of religious people would say that terrorism is an evil and wrong thing. So let's pause here and check your understanding. Pause the video, have a look at these questions and see what you come up with. When you're ready, unpause it and we'll look at some answers. Okay, answer time. So question number 1, in your own words, explain what is meant by terrorism and give an example. So hopefully you wrote something about when groups use violence or the threat of violence to achieve a political aim. You might have spoken about the targets of the violence being civilians, to make it indiscriminate and create as much fear as possible, something like that. An example might be the Twin Towers in New York, or the 7/7 bombings, or the bombing at the Manchester Arena at the Ariana Grande concert. Why do most religious people say that all acts of terrorism are wrong? They would say they're wrong because loads of different things. That it's not loving, it's not showing compassion, it's not listening, it's not using a diplomatic method, it's not praying about the issue, it's breaking the rules, it's illegal. Loads and loads of reasons. It creates harm for many. People can die. Lots of reasons for that. The effects of terrorism, we just mentioned some of those. So it could be death, it could be making someone disabled, it could be creating sadness, it could be adding to this climate of fear that we spoke about. Why do people commit terrorist acts? Well, generally the people who do it feel they have a grievance, and it might be they feel they're fighting for justice, or they are fighting to force their religion. It might be that they're fighting against poverty. Number 5 was religious people should never commit a terrorist act. And for that one, you probably mentioned some of the things we've just spoken about it not being loving or compassionate or listening. And on the flip side, you might say if they've tried everything else and it feels like their last resort, they might end up doing that. The extension there was to research some terrorist acts that have been in the news and find out what reasons have been given for those. That brings us to the end of this video lesson. So let's look at that need to know. You need to know that acts of terrorism are illegal and they are condemned by all faiths, and that anyone who commits a terrorist act does so against the teaching of their religion and not because of it. See you next time.